Every one of us has limits in our life. We have time limits. We can only do so much. We have financial limits. We only have so much money to be able to spend. And we have moral limits. Limits were in the point where we realize the edge of where we might go beyond what our character or our moral would say. Left to our own control, we tend to maximize those limits. If we've got available time, we want to fill it in with something. If we've got available money, we want to spend it. If we've got available moral boundaries, we want to push right to the end to be able to maximize the thrill of life, if you will, or we think there is, without going over the edge and making a mistake. The problem is when we live life to the max like those, it costs us. It costs us margin in our life. We're starting a series here. We're actually in the second week of a series that's called Margin. And margin was defined, last week I mentioned, was simply defined as the amount available between what is necessary and what we have. More than just space, though, margin is kind of that room for us where important things happen. That space where things beyond the to-do list start to take place and start to be effective. It provides opportunity for us to deepen relationships. So when we have in our scheduled time with people, that if we have that margin, it creates and deepens it. It gives us a greater time of worship that we can spend even on a Sunday instead of just a to-do list and tasks that we want to accomplish. It creates balance in our life so that we can find rest. And space, so that should we make mistakes or go a little too far, we're safe from disaster and that can destroy relationships or destroy our life. And so without margin, life starts to spin really out of control. Last week we talked about, we lose intimacy. We get so busy that we just don't really have the time to connect and go deep into relationships with our spouse, with our family, with our friends. We lose the purpose of life. It feels like we're just spinning plates and trying to keep things afloat, and yet none of it seems to have any kind of meaning. And we get filled in increased stress, anxiety, loneliness, and even guilt when we think of things that we haven't accomplished or haven't done. I imagine if we were honest, every one of us would say that we really wish life wasn't so busy and wearing us out. And that's really a life without margin. We mentioned last week a verse that in Matthew 11 where Jesus had described to those without margin how he could come to him and create margin. It says this, "Come to me all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Christ wasn't describing about removing burden or being able to take away financial issues or anything like that. He was describing a life where there was margin, safe margin, so that even with your circumstances, even with all that life can bring around you, you can find rest for your souls and not be overwhelmed. We're going to focus on three areas. Next week's going to be about finances. The week after, it's going to be about moral issues. But this week is about scheduling. And of all the three, one is it's the most important for me. This is probably the one that I struggle with the most. But two, I think it's important for all of us, because I think when it comes to our time and how that affects us, it spills out to other areas of our life. And so it's so important for us to be able to focus on our scheduling margin. Turn with me, if you would, to Ephesians 5. And as you're looking at that, let me just ask you, just a little poll survey, kind of a raise of hands. How many of you wish that you could have more time for self-help, for more time to kind of focus on yourself, feel healthier, work on yourself? How many of you? Is there a few of you? Yeah, okay, there's a few of you. How many of you, keep listening, how many of you wish that you had more time that you could focus on the people that you love, your relationships, your family, and all of that? Okay, pretty good so far. Everybody's kind of thinking of that. Third one, how many of you wish that you had more time that you could focus on God and you could grow on your faith? Now, I'm going to keep talking until everybody's hands up, because obviously this is kind of an important one. But you wish that I had more time for God. If only I had more time, I could work on these things. The reality is every one of us has more time. Every one of us has the same time. It's not that we don't have time. The problem is that when we have time, it ends up getting taken over. As I mentioned, our natural bent is to kind of follow the ways of the culture. Our natural inclination is that when there's some available time, we try to use it up. When there's available money, we want to spend it. That we want to consume that margin area. That's the cultural bent. And when we focus on that, the culture has a way of taking over our life and causes us to live our life more on the focus of urgent than maybe on what's important. It squeezes out the important things of our life in those three examples and replaces it with the things that are urgent, the next thing that we got to get done. Now, I'm speaking from experience, so you need to listen because I'm speaking to you as this is a first-person testimony here of what that's like. That you end up taking care of the next thing and neglecting those things that are really important. And the Bible warns us to stay away from that. The Bible warns us to watch out for that, to be able to guard against that, to be wise about those things that are going on that are causing us to lose margin. So let's take a look at this passage. The passage is in Ephesians 5. Starting at verse 15, it says this: "Be very careful then how you should live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." Paul, who wrote this letter, said, be very careful how you should live. Be very careful not to let the culture take over control of your life. Be very careful to not let things that matter be pushed aside because of the urgent things that get thrown at you to deal with. Be very careful to not let false realities take control of your life to the extent that you miss what's important and the margin that needs to undermine the margin in your life. I'm going to give you 4 realities that we should really focus on or think about when we think about margin. When we think about being careful, to look at these and call into question, the difference between how we view them as an unwise person as opposed to a wise person. The first reality is this: your time is limited. Now you're probably thinking, I don't need to write that down. I know that. We all have 24 hours in a day. We all have 7 days in a week. We all have 52 weeks in a year. And yet, we schedule ourselves as if it is unlimited. Someone calls you up and says, hey, you free Friday night? You look and say, oh yeah, I'm free, let's do it. Someone else asks you if you'd be willing to join this community. Yeah, let's do it. We just keep adding things and saying, sure, yes, adding and adding and adding as if we have unlimited time. How often do you actually, when someone asks you to do something, do you pause and say, okay, what do I need to give up to do that? We don't. We just figure out a way that we can squeeze it in the margin, figure out a way that we can add it onto the list and make things happen and work it out. No wonder we're exhausted, because we're wanting to fit more and more and more into our schedule, because we act as if it's unlimited. But the reality is that every one of us has limited amount of time that we have to live, that we're forced to stick within. The second reality is this: all of your time is going to be spent doing something. In other words, you never end the week or the day with extra time. Life is not like an AT&T account where you can roll over your minutes. And then, next week I've got, an extra, hour or 60 minutes. So that's going to be a great week because I've got this extra. I keep building this time. We don't go through life and then at the end when God is ready to take us home or when we're ready to die to say, oh, wait a minute, I've been storing up time. I got 6 months here. I need to be able to spend it. It doesn't work that way, does it? No, we live each moment of each day, and at the end of the day, it's done. And yet we live as if there's extra time. We look at something that we know is important, and we say, you know what, I'll do that later. We want to say, that we choose things, when we look at things, we want to